Can I still get a mortgage after bankruptcy, divorce, or a job loss? Let's talk about that today on Just Mortgages. So you're in a bankruptcy, you've had some hard times, that's fine. I always tell my clients that have bankruptcy issues, look, I don't care what happened in the past, I want to know who you are now and who you're going to be in the future, because that's what the lenders are going to look at. Because I have to sell the story that what happened in the past can't happen again, right? So we go through and make sure that we find out a little bit about the story, because they may ask, no big deal, tell them a little bit about the story, but we prepare the case. I always tell people I'm kind of like your lawyer in the mortgage business, right? So you have to tell me everything so we can present that to the lender in a way that's favorable for you and makes the lender understand what you had gone through. A lot of times you don't even have to deal with it. Bankruptcy is a bankruptcy, it's old enough and we get an approval. And let's talk about a little bit about time frames on bankruptcy, because it stays on your credit report for 10 years. Right? It's supposed to stay on there for 10 years. After that, it cannot be put on your credit report. It says on the application, have you filed bankruptcy in the last 7 years? And you have to answer yes or no, right? So if it was 6 years ago, you're going to answer yes. So we're going to know about it, even if it may not even be on your credit report, because sometimes they aren't listed on the credit reports. But the lenders, if we get an automated approval, we run it through an automated system, approval system. If it gives us an approval, which most of the time it does after the 3-year mark, because a FHA loan is 3 years. So after 3 years, you can get a standard loan. It doesn't matter whether you had a bankruptcy or not. VA loans are 2 years, and conventional loans go all the way up to 7 years, depending upon how much money you're putting down. So conventional is the most strict, right? But if we get an automated approval, they don't really care what happened. But if I get we call this a refer eligible on our approval, meaning it gets referred to an underwriter for manual underwrite, then we have to actually tell the story and tell the underwriter why this happened and why it's not going to happen in the future. Chapter 13 bankruptcy. Chapter 13 is when you go in and you pay all your creditors off over a 3 to 5 year period. Do you know that you can actually get a loan while you're still in Chapter 13? You're in a Chapter 13 bankruptcy for the past 12 months. You paid your trustee on time, paid all your creditors on time for the past 12 months. You get a letter from the trustee allowing you to buy a house. You can take that and we can get you into a loan with an FHA lender. Chapter 7 is what we talked about prior, which is basically a complete liquidation. Chapter 13 is when you pay your creditors back, maybe at a reduced amount, but you get that done over a 3 to 5 year period. So there's some leniency there, right? Let's talk about divorce scenarios. Let's say you're in the middle of a divorce and you're needing to go find another property because your spouse is going to keep that property. We need to go buy one. Well, we have a lot of people that come to us and say, look, I need to buy a house now because we're separating and I need to find a home. Well, you're still married. In Texas, there is no separation law. You're either divorced or you're single, period. There is no separation. That means that if you're buying a primary residence, your spouse has to sign the deed of trust. So your current spouse would have to come in to closing on your home and sign the deed of trust. They would not have to be responsible on the loan, but they would still have to sign. And that's okay. Sometimes we have amicable divorces where we have a spouse that's willing to do that. What we recommend is that you get the divorce finalized, rent initially, get the divorce finalized, then come to us, that we don't have to include your spouse at all. That's the best strategy to do that, is make sure that we get a good clean break. And then we start out with you just being single and just look at your credit, have you sign the deed of trust, and you don't have to get what's called a quit claim deed and release that former spouse from title. There's a lot more paperwork involved. The spouse may not want to show up at the last minute for your closing, and then you can't close. A lot of things can hinder the closing of the loan in a divorce scenario. Dealing with divorce as well, we want to talk about reviewing your credit, because what happens we see in divorce scenarios is the other spouse not paying their portion of the bills that they're responsible for, and now your credit's affected. That is the biggest issue we run into, because the lender, if you look at a divorce decree, let's just say that you're already divorced. You have a fully executed divorce decree by the judge, And it says on there that this car that's being paid for is the responsibility of your former spouse. Well, when you bought the car, it was a joint debt, so it's still on your credit, and that former spouse is not making the payments, and now your credit score has been affected. Now granted, the lender will not count that payment against your debt to income ratio and count that non-payment against you, like saying that you're not making those payments, so we're not going to loan you money, but it is affecting your credit score. That's what usually kills the deal, is the fact that the credit score is way below the minimums required to get the loan. So be very careful with that when you're doing your negotiation on your divorce, is make sure that you get that car refinanced, sold, get everything off your credit. If there's a house and the spouse gets that, you want to make sure that you require that be refinanced within a short period of time, or that house be sold and the equity be distributed amongst the both of you. If you have child support, you need to make sure that if you're receiving child support, you get 3 months of receiving child support, you can use that for income. If you're having to pay child support, we need to know about it, because that goes against your debt to income ratio. You can't get away from that, because that's going to show up on your credit through the Attorney General's office, or it's going to show up on your pay stub, or it's going to show in the divorce decree that you're required to do that. So make sure that you disclose that and let us know if you have to pay child support, or better yet, if you're receiving that, we can use that to help calculate your debt to income ratios. So job loss, the last and final thing. Now, a lot of people, they run into situations where they lose their job, they get laid off. Well, if you're laid off and you're thinking about buying a house, I'll kind of give an example of one that we're dealing with right now. The gentleman was working as a paramedic and then started with a new company, and he gets a lot of overtime. See, overtime is calculated on a 2-year average basis. If you move over to a new employer, even if it's in the same occupation, we can only calculate using your base income. You cannot use your overtime. Well, that doubles his income with the overtime. So we have to wait at least a year, if you're in the same occupation, to be able to calculate and use overtime. So just be aware of that. You can't just change jobs, show a paycheck, and be able to get calculation based upon those numbers, because it's overtime, and commissions even worse. You have to have 2 years of commissions, if there's commissions involved, to be able to utilize that for calculation purposes. Because think about it from the lender standpoint. They want to make sure it's consistent income. You want to make sure it's consistent income to be able to make that house payment. So it protects you as the borrower, protects the lender, and as long as we know about it up front, there's no disagreements as to how we calculate your DTI. Now, maternity leave is another area that we need to be aware of. If you're pregnant now and going to be going on maternity leave, that does affect your ability to use that income to qualify for a mortgage. So make sure you disclose that to the loan officer, that any maternity leave, if you're on maternity leave at the time, that income that you're being paid, if at all, cannot be used to qualify for a mortgage until you're back at work, and then they can utilize your standard earned income at that point in time. You know, all these things we've talked about. We talked about bankruptcies. We talked about divorce. We talked about job loss. All these things are negative items that happen in life. But that doesn't mean that it's going to stop you from purchasing a home. At Just Mortgages, we're experts in being able to weave our way through all the rules and regulations that pertain to these items. But you have to come to us. We need to know all the facts. You have to disclose everything to us. Again, I always tell people, we're like your lawyers. Tell us everything so we can figure out a way to present your case to the lender. You know, these three things we talked about today happen to a lot of people. You're not the only one that had a bankruptcy. You're not the only one that went through a divorce. You're not the only one that lost their job. But you know what? It's not the end, it's the beginning. And here at Just Mortgages, that's what we do. We help you get back on your feet, because you know what? That's what family does. Family helps family get back on their feet. We have the knowledge, we have the know-how, and we have the lenders that like these type of borrowers that have had hardships. And Just Mortgages will be the family that guides you to get you into your next home. If you like this video and you've gone through a bankruptcy, a divorce, or a job loss, we can help you at Just Mortgages. Give us a call or visit our website.